I was thinking about you on the weekend. I was watching an interview with Matt Rule, the head football coach in Nebraska, and I think kind of similar circumstances. Like the program had its glory days in the '90s. Maybe fell in some hard times, and they're starting to get some traction now, similar to you guys. And the one thing he talked about, he's like, at least when I came here, I had the benefit where players had to walk past 5 national championship trophies. So even though it hadn't been done in a long time, at least we could say it can happen. It's possible. It's not
Yep.
this dream. How when you just maybe going back to when you pursued this gig, how valuable was that to know? Hey, like at least I've got that carrot to dangle that it's been done and you can win at Maine.
Um, I really didn't. It didn't really. I didn't think about that at all, to be honest. When I was going through um, the process of the job interview process here 3 years ago, but then when I got here, I realized that is a really important part. Like obviously I knew the history and I knew the history of the program. When I was growing up as a kid, I wanted to go to Maine, and I'm from Minnesota. And there's a million places you can go out there, and Maine was in the '90s, early 2000s. That was the place to be, and
Yeah.
so I remember all that stuff. But all when you're going through it, you really sometimes you only think about like, okay, I've been in Hockey East now for 10, 11, 12 years with Providence and UMass, and now
Yeah.
here, like I haven't seen that part of it I haven't lived that personally. So like it really wasn't in my mind as much as maybe it should be, but it has, then when we started to change, when we started to have a little bit of traction, really it was like a year and a half ago, our team started playing a little better. You could see like how important it was to the community up here, and you see how fast it became like wildfire again. And it was really cool, and I didn't realize what it would be like, and it was more than I could ever imagine. So now we have to keep getting better and keep improving, and it can't just be oh well, we had fun for a year, kind of a deal. So
Well, it was funny. So I mentioned the renos you're getting done to your facility, and for anybody that hasn't Googled Alfond Arena yet, like do that, because like even just the aerial view of it, it looks more like a European cathedral than it does a hockey rink.
yeah,
It is so
yeah.
unique, and the renos look awesome. But just in that process, I caught some clips of games last year, and just holy shit, like the game night atmosphere there, it looks like it's still the place to be in college hockey.
Yeah.
What's that experience like? Just like getting up in the morning on a Friday and going to the rink and feeling that buzz.
It's really special. I've been in a lot of schools in the NCAA level, and been at basically every rink. Um, and Maine has always been special. The Alfond has always been like a place that extremely unique. The design, the acoustics inside are really, it's one of those places you have to go to fully appreciate, and you have to be there for a game. But there was a big difference between having 3,000 and 4,000 people in the game to having 5,000 people, and that's what
Yeah.
last year kind of it came back again, and basically every game was a sellout, and the difference that makes, and in a building like that is it is such a huge difference for you just feel it when you walk in. We played a playoff game there against UNH, which is our big rival. We played the quarterfinal playoff game, and I was walking off the ice with Mike Souza, who's a good friend of mine, the head coach at UNH, and we were both like, we have never been in a building this loud anywhere, at any level.
No way. That's cool.
Yeah, so it's really really a special place, and in the renovations, I think it'll preserve the tradition and the history of the rink, but it'll also really update the facilities for the players. We've already done quite a bit with new scoreboards last year, new lights. So we've actually done some things in the rink the last couple of years. But when this renovation is done, I think the fan experience will still be phenomenal, and it'll be enhanced. And then for those student athletes, it'll be bringing it around to the 21st century, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Season's right around the corner. when you're driving into the rink this morning, what's on your mind?
Um, just what we're going to do for practice today, and then
Yeah,
talking to you, and then talking to you at noon.
yeah. There you
So,
go.
uh, yeah, I mean, our world is changing daily in the NCAA. As you probably hear a lot of things that are happening. Not necessarily just in hockey. It's in change is crazy in the NCAA world right now. So it's easy to get caught up in some of that stuff sometimes, and it really distracts you from day to day. And right now we're on the ice with our team. We got a couple weeks before our first game, and um, we think we have a really good group of players that had a pretty unique experience last year that hadn't been done in a while. Now, how do we build on that and hopefully take another step?
What's that next layer for your program? Like if we were to fast forward 4 to 6 weeks, what would you say, hey, from like now till then, we want to add this, whether it's to our game or program, anything?
Yeah, I think the next layer for us on the ice is just taking those experience. Like we had a year where it had been 10, 12 years since the program had gone to the Garden at the end of the year playing
Yeah.
hockey semifinals, and then we lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament. And it had been, I think, 12 years since the team had gone to the tournament and or the hockey semifinals. So, and we lost those two games. It was really disappointing. So as much as we want to, there's definitely some growth that happened, and there were some really good things that happened with the program last year. At the end of the day, we did not accomplish what we want to accomplish, and so to get from okay, we're a top quarter team in hockey East, which is really hard to do in our league. There's a tremendous amount of talent, and every program is really good. To get to the NCAA tournament, which is that's the goal at the beginning of the year, because then you win 4 games and you can win a national championship. But we need to take a mental jump more so maybe than physical. We have to believe that we're going to go out and execute and not be overwhelmed by those situations. And I don't think that's what happened to us last year, but we didn't step up and make the plays when we needed to be, when we needed to make the plays. And ultimately that's, the difference between winning and losing in 1 game playoff scenarios. And, hopefully we can take that mental jump as a program. We feel we have the people, the student athletes and the staff and the people around here to do it. Uh, but talking about it is a lot different than actually doing it.
No doubt. No doubt. And, you know, my perception of NCAA hockey is particularly if you go to a game live, and I don't know if it's a byproduct of being, a Friday, Saturday night league and you get 5 practices, but um, when the puck drops, it's like 100-meter sprint over 60 minutes. Like it has a different level of intensity, I would argue, than other levels of hockey. I mean, you go to game 47 in the National Hockey League, they might take their foot off the gas and it looks more like a soccer match than it is a hockey game. But,
Yeah.
so I asked that because that intensity obviously gets, ratcheted up in those big moments, in those big games. How do you prepare for that in practice?
Yeah, that was good question. And I actually, at the conference there a couple weeks ago, that was kind of, my theme of, we do that through creating that intense environment every day in practice. I agree with your assessment. Like college hockey is probably, I have my there are assistants here. Alfie Michaud was a goaltender on the last national championship team here and played pro hockey for a long time. Had a cup of coffee in the NHL. And Jason Forte coached in just about every junior league and in Canada. Excuse me, before he came here when I got hired. And those guys feel like it's as close to like the Stanley Cup playoffs every night
Yeah.
as
And
you
I
can
don't,
get.
for anybody that's listening, like, I don't think that's like, overstepping. I think that's like, it's just,
No,
you got to
it's
watch
not.
it.
It's definitely not like you're not comparing the talent level, and like, you're just comparing the intensity level of it. And I think a big part of it is we're only playing 34 games plus playoffs.
Yeah.
You have 4 or 5 days to prepare for everybody you're playing, and that makes you so the familiarity with the teams you're playing is so high, especially within your league. So it's everything they're going to do. They know everything you're going to do. So there's just no ice out there. There's no free ice. You have to, it's physical, it's fast, and and you have to make plays and capitalize on any mistakes because there aren't many. So it's truly unique. And then trying to create that in practice is definitely a challenge. It's actually not a challenge, but how much can you have your guys banging each other every single day, in small area games and physical, and how much are how intense are you going to let it go in practice and that's the challenge that we all face, because you don't want your guys to get hurt and injured, but you also can't just turn it on when you go out and play a game. It's like, oh, okay, I'm ready for this. We've been doing shooting drills all week in practice, but now I'm ready to get in the pressure cooker. So you have to find that balance a little bit. But if we don't, the way our program has been, and just kind of the way we operate, we feel like if we don't have at least probably 10 or 15 minutes of game like physical, whether it's small area game or 5-on-5 type scenarios in practice, like they actually get really mad at me, and they get really mad at our, hey, coach, what are we doing? We're supposed to be doing our compete drill here at the end. So that's actually a great feeling when your guys actually really want to do that every day, so, and we're lucky that we have that in our culture right now here, because we've been at it for 3 years with our staff here. So, but yeah, that's a really good question there. How do you create that every day? And that's always the challenge.
It's interesting you mentioned just the familiarity between the programs. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I could certainly see where, I mean, 50-50 puck races are critical at every level, but could just imagine that when each team knows each other inside and out, that those become even more important, and probably the difference in the game. Going back to, you joined us in Toronto a few weeks ago, which was awesome. And you had a great presentation, really focused on the details in practice. Coaches love details. Coaches love, you know, picking apart the game at a granular level. Going back to when you first arrived at Maine, there's likely an infinite number of details that you could focus on. My impression is that the best coaches, they don't focus on 100 details. They probably focus on um, somewhere between maybe 6 to 8. And that might change year to year depending on the growth of your team. Do you recall when you first joined, maybe a couple of those key areas where you said, hey, we might, this is going to be a work in progress. This is a couple years in the making, but for right now, we're going to focus on these key areas in practice, in games, and it's just we're going to keep hammering on it until we get them.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that you have to be good. You can't be good at everything. You can't be the best at every part of the game, but you have to be good at some things. And um, for us, and it's such a cliche, and everyone talks about it. We want to be the most competitive team in our conference, and
Yeah.
and the sell for our staff to our players, and this, maybe this will change over time, and maybe it definitely has changed from day one to fast forward 3 years where we are today. Um, but if we're going to go out and play against Boston College and BU and Providence and Northeastern, UMass, down the list, UNH, UConn, like the reality of it was we had to be that to give ourselves a chance to, with how we were built as a program, to give ourselves a chance to compete. So we were just trying to figure out how to compete. Well, how do we teach our players that? Obviously, we have to recruit a certain type of individual
Sure.
that matches what, that lines up with what we're gonna, try to get out of them. But then those habits that you talked about, finishing every hit, and that doesn't mean you're smoking guys and knocking them over every time. Just always being on the right side of the puck. Your routes on breakouts and forechecks and neutrals, like all that stuff has to be really, really tight and really, really structured and clean. As crazy as staying on your feet and being hard in a one-on-one battle, like you mentioned, those one-on-one battles are really what decides the games at our level every
Yeah.
single night. And that's That's what you see in the playoffs, which is why the Stanley Cup playoffs are so awesome. Everyone wants to tune in at that time of the year because the intensity in that one battle that one player wins can be the difference between winning a Stanley Cup or not, or winning a series and not. So we've really tried to focus on those things, and in that in our that presentation at your conference there a few weeks ago, that was we do that. That's the most important thing that we hammer into our guys every week. And obviously there's a ton of ways you can play the game, X's and O's, um, and I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do that. But how good are you going to be within whatever that system might
Yeah.
be? And it usually comes down to those little details of staying on your feet, finishing your hits, taking good routes on the back check or the reloads or whatever you want to call it, or tracking, and getting the puck to the far post rather than just putting it short side and trying to go short side shelf every time. So those little things that if we work on it every day and become a little bit better at it, maybe that makes a difference.
Another key ingredient in winning is mental toughness. I'm not sure, and I don't want to bring back any bad memories here. Um, your first year at Maine, you started 0-8-1. You didn't win your first game in regulation until December 11th. And I'm sure, like every coach, you get and listen, it's tough to do what you're doing right now. There's a lot of really good coaches that aren't able to get programs at various levels over the hump. Like, it's really tough to do, and it certainly seems like you're on the right track. But going back to then, um, like, what were those car rides like home after those games, and just keeping yourself mentally in the right mindset to continue leading your team?
Yeah, really good question, and you reflect on that. Luckily for me, I'd been through that like three other times at different programs, not as a head coach, as an assistant, but so when I started with my first full time job was at Union College with Nate Lehman, where we built a program with Rick Bennett and Nate, and that really was one of the top programs for 3 or 4 years and won a
Yeah,
national championship. And then Nate and I went to Providence and did the same thing in 3 years. Like, what in the first year is always brutal. It just is. And then I was at UMass before I got the job here. In our first year, which was like 2015-16, I think we won 5 games. So
yeah,
we actually won 2 more games here than we did our first. And then 4 years later, we won the national championship. So for me, I was just really fortunate that I'd been through that a few times. Didn't make it any easier. I'm sure I'm still, my wife Tara and I have 3 kids. Like, I'm sure, the first year and a half, 2 years were really tough for a coach. As it's like, no matter, you're mentally prepared for it. And I knew that we were going to have, some, a long year that first year and into the second year. I knew that was going to be the case. As much as you have hope that maybe it isn't, you mentally prepare yourself for it. And I think it would have been a lot harder had I not gone through this at other programs before, and I was super fortunate to have that experience, with Carvey and Andy Murray and Nate Lehman, and then the experience I had at Shattuck as a student athlete in high school back in the day. Like, I've just, if you stick to what um, the basics and the standards that you hold people to, and that you hold yourself to, eventually it's going to turn. And I've seen it happen enough where you don't lose faith. And I have a really good staff here that obviously is, Jason, Elfie, Nick Fonzie, Eric Soltis. Like, we have some phenomenal people around here, which we all keep each other sane too.
yeah. That's important too. That's important too. Where does you mentioned those, going through that process before, and again, I think, this time of year, like, every coach is getting in front of their team and talking about the best case scenario, what could be, um, but those are words. You obviously have been a part of selling belief effectively. Do you have any insights in terms of how you do that? Is it a singular speech? Is it a slogan on the wall? Is it more of a long term process of selling that vision and instilling it in your players?
Um, I think it's a long term process. I think, we have a sports performance coach that's worked with our team here since I got here. He actually worked with our team at UMass as well. I've known him for a really long time. That process takes 3 to 5 years. Those are his words, and I've lived it multiple times. So like sometimes that process is things get a little bit worse before they start to get better too. And because you're trying to rewire maybe a way of doing things. That doesn't mean the previous way of doing things was wrong, or but when you're trying to rewire everyone with how, like, hey, this is what we're trying to do here. Words are words. We have to take the words and put them in action, not just put them on the wall and look at them every day and talk about them. That process takes a while. We didn't really see much of a. It took a year and a half for us to really kind of start seeing here. We're like, wow, okay, and I could tell you the game where, it. You were like, hey, I think we finally got it. Doesn't mean we're going to win. We're still not going to win every game, but I think there's an understanding of what we're trying to do now. And then
Yeah.
that growth really accelerated in the second half of our second year, and then last year was our third year, and we felt like we could win every night. So, and I don't know if I have any advice on that. I think, when you have a core values or an identity or whatever you want to call it, and how you want to play or how you want your program to conduct themselves, on and off the ice. I think you try to relate it to what you're doing on the ice too, which would and that's something that, I think our staff spends a lot of time on. Like, if we have a core value of X, like, is this play that we're watching on the video or in practice, and that, is that consistent with what we're talking about? And if it is, then we're probably in a good place. And if it's not, whether it's a poor penalty, whether it's, a lazy back check or whatever, why is that not consistent with what we say we want to do? This isn't the coaches telling you, like, we come up with our own core values. Our program sets these together. So this isn't the coaches sitting here telling you we have to do this, that, and the other. This is what we've all decided together that we want to do. And relating that to maybe, what happens on the ice, whether it's practice or a game, I think has been really effective for us.
That's fascinating. What do those conversations look like with your players? How do you facilitate that?
Um, I think it's not necessarily, we do a lot of one-on-one video, but I think a lot of that stuff has to be in a team environment,
Yeah,
and sometimes that becomes, it becomes tough to do because you don't want anything to be like, you're coming down on an individual or making it personal, or that's, I don't believe, a way to, the way to get the most out of anybody. But, if one of our, for example, if one of our core values is humble, we want to have humility. We want to be humble. How do we, one way that we're going to do that is we're going to be humble enough to go out and, for 45 seconds or whatever long our shift is, we are going to work that entire time. Not 1 or 2 seconds are we going to take off. Because if we take off 1 or 2 seconds, there's a lack of humility there. We're like, you know what? I don't need to work right now. And, because I'm good enough, or this isn't a situation where I can just stand up straight and the puck comes to me. I'm not ready for it. It goes through my legs, and now we've turned the puck over. And,
sure.
That isn't humble. That's not playing with humility. Taking a retaliatory penalty on someone that just hit us hard is a, obviously there's no humility in that. So, when you can talk with your team about that kind of stuff, I think it really kind of frames what we're trying to do. And those are really good teaching moments. And, I could go on and on about different, core values or identity with how we want to play and how you can relate it to the team. But when you have the right individuals, they all understand that, and they really rally around that. And I think that's been a big part of our change here.
Well, I think one thing you said that's super interesting to me is that you have a performance coach and that there's a dialogue with the coaches. And that's certainly an observation that I've made, that more and more coaches are inviting folks with with that education or background into their room and really inviting them to be a part of, I guess, the language of the program, how things are communicated, making sure there's consistency and that things stick, and almost treating like these opportunities to address your team almost like, lack of a better word, like almost like a sermon. And it's like, don't wing it. Like, make sure that over the course of the year that the key message is sticking, and it's, over time it becomes part of your DNA. So I think that, again, not everybody has the resources of a Division I hockey team, but I think just having somebody in your corner who you can bounce ideas off of, in terms of how you connect with your team is a really key insight in those, as you've built the program, as you've added these layers outside of the final score on the clock after 60 minutes. What might be some of the other things that you were looking for? It could be analytics, it could be with an eyeball test to say, hey, these are the things that I'm going to pay attention to as the head coach to sort of evaluate if we're moving in the right directions, and that might not necessarily be wins and losses.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about. How do you create that environment in practice that you're that in and translate that to a game where you're evaluating it the same way. I'm obviously you have access to so many analytics, really, and
Yeah.
it's really just like almost within instantaneous. You can do it between
Wild.
periods after a
Yeah.
game. Yeah, it's crazy. So I mean that's come a long way. And to be honest, I don't know if I'm smart enough to understand half of them either. So,
Yeah.
the one thing that I think our staff really spends time on, and it goes back to all those standards and those habits that we were talking about, as far as finishing hits, creating change of possessions, um, you know uh, stats that don't go on the score sheet, we really try to find value in, and we have a rating system for these things, which I won't get into, but
Yeah.
um, what value are you adding to the game outside of the goals and assists? We all know who gets the goals and assists or the
Yeah.
saves or whatever in a game that every game, but those are the type of things that you can add value with as a player. And a lot of those players get overlooked. In the recruiting world, they get overlooked. And I've coached dozens of them at different schools over the years that end up having NHL careers that nobody else recruited at our level, let alone at the NHL level, and then undrafted, whatever. And you just, that player creates more turnovers, whether it's with physical play, smart play, whatever, than anyone out there. And they might not be the highest producing player, but like being able to find those statistics, so to speak, that where you can evaluate players based on that. We have a way that we do it here, and the guys take a lot of pride in it. Um, and it's really stuck. And I think it's been a huge reason why our culture has changed, because our culture is built around, and we tie them to our core values. We call them things in games that probably wouldn't make sense to somebody that wasn't in our program. But like
Yeah.
it's our guys know what it is, and they love it. And so really getting traction with that stuff and that's hard. At first it probably sounds cheesy to most of them. Like this is silly. Like I don't, then once we're consistent with it over time, and it might take a couple years or at least a year, then it starts, you really start seeing the difference in how they play,
I think that's so important because my perception is that effectively what that does is it creates a currency that everybody can tap into. It's inclusive to everybody, and it just incites buy-in in a really
Yeah.
positive way. You talk about cultures. A lot of ways you can measure culture from an outsider's perspective of your program. Long before we ever connected, this what signaled to me that something was cooking in Maine that was different was that Bradley Nadeau made a commitment to, or the Nadeau brothers made a commitment to. But again, for listeners, Bradley Nadeau, first round pick to Carolina, made a commitment to you in the NIL and transfer portal era, and he kept it. And he showed up, and I just thought, I'm like, man. Again, I'm not calling anybody out. I'm just gonna. I wouldn't be surprised if he got poked a little bit, while he
Yeah.
was sitting on that. Uh, but he followed through on it. And I just, again, I can't point to what the reason for that is. I'm assuming it's, part relationship, part belief, but the fact that he followed through, showed up on campus and lit it up last year, I think speaks volumes of what you built there.
Yeah, I'd love to sit here and tell you, yeah, that it was all because of how awesome we thought the coaches were, and we had to obviously prove
No doubt.
that we could help Brad, and Brad and Josh are not, or any high level player are. They're not going to go to a program where they don't believe they can win and they don't think they're going to get better. And
Yeah.
so we had a year or 2 years to kind of show that and show the improvement from year 1 to year 2. Hopefully, I think the other piece of it too is they're from not a couple hours away from here, so we were super fortunate that almost I think their whole town showed up to most games on any given night because they're from just over the border in New Brunswick, a couple hours away. So there was a lot of really cool things, with Josh and Brad that made this thing pretty cool. Not only having brothers that are very dynamic like that on the same team. But just geographically, there's not a lot of people around. Like we don't have a lot of players that can say they come from around Orono, Maine. To be honest with you, and those two being able to say that is pretty incredible. And obviously what they brought last year, and I know Josh will continue to do this year is pretty special. So, but again, we had that Carvey. When we went to UMass, like Cale Makar was committed there, and he
Yeah.
might have told you this story. And, he did the same thing. This was before the transfer portal era, but he was not signed. He could have gone anywhere. And, so again, having those experiences and having gone through that with other people and other recruiting scenarios, I think really helped. And that's just, I was really fortunate in having gone through that a few times already.
Well, it's funny you mentioned, Cale. I've gotten to know Cale's dad, Gary, and who's a great dude. And he talked about just, and again, I think this is something a great takeaway for coaches at all levels is that there was clearly a plan there for his son, and then that kind of created trust and a belief that despite maybe the team not being contenders at that moment in time, that the team was headed in the right direction and that there was going to be a plan for his son. um, One thing I'd love to ask you is that a player, in one sense, a player like Cale Makar, Bradley Nadeau at your level might not require a lot of coaching. Like it's probably easy just to open the gate, let them rip. They can probably recover from a lot of their mistakes um, and everything's great. But we've seen it time and time again where players excel at your level. And again, going back to the habits, maybe they don't get those habits and details in their game, and when they get to the professional level, that you start seeing the warts. How do you coach players like that and push them to find those habits and details that are going to help them excel at the top level?
Yeah, that's a challenge, and I think the best way to do it is to obviously get to know them, and you do that, hopefully before they get to your program. And for we you have some kind of relationship. We had 2 years before Brad and Josh got here at Maine, to kind of try to develop a relationship. We had 1 year at Cale at UMass before Cale came to UMass. But you're right. Like you're not. A lot of times coaches get the credit for coaching players, and like players like that, you're just fortunate to be where you are when they're we were lucky to be with Cale. We were lucky that the Brad and Josh came here last year, but you have to find a way to try to add value to them every single day and every year. And and hopefully that just becomes with having honest conversations with them daily. And I can see as you live and learn as a coach sometimes. And I can tell you, I worked with a D at UMass, and obviously when Cale came, like I was a little younger, and I didn't really. You don't want to. You almost approach it like you don't want to make anybody mad, and you don't want to.
Yeah.
You don't want to offend anybody. And then, I remember like halfway, 2/3 the way through that first year, Cale was having an up and down year. He was an outstanding player, obviously. But the second year is when he really, he won the Hobie Baker, and then he went right from from our team right to the NHL playoffs. And um, I mean, this is the type of kid he is. He actually came to us and was like, "Hey, we need you. I need you to push me a little harder." Like
No way.
it was more of like he was having some knee things going on, and it was like, we were kind of letting him decide, hey, like you have 10, if your knee hurts, you're not going, and then I remember, he thought he wasn't playing that well. And he was like, hey, like, I forget exactly what he said. It was like, you can give it to me a little, I can take it. And,
Sure.
and that was to Carvey and me and Jared DeMichael at the time. And that was really eye opening. And it just kind of tells you how self-aware of a person. And that's what makes him, he's phenomenally gifted, obviously, but he's so extremely self-aware of how he is doing at any given moment, and that's really what sets him apart from especially at the NHL level. Everybody's good. It's like if you can be that self-aware and that reflective,
Yeah.
it's an incredible skill, and that was what really a good learning experience for me.
When you've reflected on this journey at Maine, I mean, I would say that kind of your coaching journey, you marinated. You certainly kind of rounded all the bases to prepare for this. But when you reflect on it, what's maybe the one thing that you've learned where you're like, I wouldn't have figured this out unless I was in the head coach's seat?
um I think a lot of it is stuff that isn't hockey wide. Like I wasn't prepared for, up here we don't have pro sports in Maine. We don't have any other Division One NCAA institutions in Maine. So like, up here, the microscope is maybe on you a little bit more than some of the, and I've never been a head coach, so it's not maybe fair for me to say this stuff, but having gone, with Nate, we're at Union and Providence, and then I was at Western Michigan and UMass, and those programs were becoming what they are. They weren't household names at the time. And
Yeah.
Maine is a household name based on what happened in the 90s and 2000s. Maine is a household name, whether the program was doing well or not at the time. And then you add in, like, this is really kind of this is the team in the state of Maine that people really rally around. And I don't think I was prepared for that, especially that first year when you're going through it and you're trying to put 24 hours a day into fixing, the things on the ice. And then there's two or three, media things you got to do. And, and that's daily. So it's like, that was the one thing that I don't think there's a way to prepare for that if you haven't gone through it, and I think I got a little better at managing that the last couple of years. I'm still learning, but, managing your time more. I mean, hockey is hockey.
Sure.
And I think, a lot of the players, especially, at our level, and I'm sure at the pro level and, CHL level, like, whether you're a head coach or an assistant coach, you're always kind of looking at it like it's yours, like, I think the best assistants at our level, I will say, like, and the guys that move on and become head coaches and, hopefully, I'll get to be one of those someday. Like, are there always, whether they're the head coach or they're taking it like they're the head coach every day because it's that important to them,
Yeah.
and so I guess that piece of it, that your voice is a little louder maybe as a head coach, but yeah, I always just looked at it like that just because I was with coaches that allowed me to be that way, which is super fortunate.
Looking back at your background as a player, I don't know. We've had Tom Ward on the program. We've done some features on Shattuck's. I'm fascinated on that place because I feel like they've just preserved some old school values and that I think are timeless. You were part of one. You were part of one of, like, when that thing got going. You were on that team. Um, what has stuck with you until now from that experience?
Everything, I don't know if I think that experience was the most shaping experience of my life. I mean, I was there for 4 years. So I was there from, the time I'm 14 to the time I'm
Did
18.
JP
And
recruit you?
he didn't recruit me. I just went, my dad and my uncle went there when it was a military school.
Oh, no way! Wow.
So like, so they always wanted me to go there, and I just happened to go there when JP. That was the year he came,
No
and then
kidding.
Andy Murray came, Tom Ward came. All these coaches came in those 4 years that I was there, and so that was just like right place, right time. And it's the only reason I'm talking to you today. It's the only, because I wasn't an elite player. I was not a, um, it's just truly a special place. And I think it's one of the few places that they've remained true to themselves. I mean, Tom Ward, his first year was my senior year. So I was there his first year when he was coaching there, and he's still there. And then that's, he left for a few years to go to the NHL. But I mean, when you have that kind of consistency, I think that is such an advantage for them, and why they can just continually year after year bring, produce high level players. And, um, that was, as shaping for me. I was there. Andy Murray was our coach. So Andy Murray, my junior year, Andy came, I think he was with Philly, or I can't remember what, he was an assistant on an NHL team. He took 1 year off from the NHL, came and coached us for a year. That was the first year we won the national championship in
No
1999.
answer. Yeah.
And then the next year he was the head coach of the LA Kings. So we were just sitting there going, we just had the head coach of the LA Kings coach us for a year, like,
Yeah.
so I mean, it was truly incredible, like the experience that we all had there. And whether we, a lot of the high end names, like Zach Parise was one player that we played with. He was kind of the first, um, of that era that, that kind of made it. And then obviously after that, the Crosbys and McKinnon, all
Yeah.
these guys, and Taves and whatever. Like, so, that was all after us. But, just being there for that time where they were kind of building that was, the most life changing. I mean, how when you're 14, 18, you're in high school, it's like the most impressionable years of your life.
Totally.
And so to be there at that time, and it was, you know, for my buddies, like I grew up in Duluth, but my family moved down to Faribault. They still live there where Shattuck is. So, um, we were just like small town kids, and all of a sudden, like all of us are Division I players, and none of us had any business doing that. We just were around the best coaches you could ever have as a young kid, you know?
You know what? I didn't realize you were from Duluth, man.
Yeah.
It's funny. We were just total aside here. We do this series called Hockey Factories. We've been doing it for done 2 seasons now, and so we've been looking at some other sites. And I'm like, usually it's based on a club or a program, one from every country. And I said, man, I know there's not a club, but I'm like, Duluth is a hockey factory. It's unbelievable. Like the longer I'm doing this, like more and more, like I think you just feel like you shake a tree out there and hockey players fall out of it. It's crazy. So yeah, we'll have
That
to
would
keep
be a
that.
fun place to go. Cause like I don't know if it's still like this, Aaron, but I grew up and there was 10 youth hockey organizations within the city. This is a city of like 90 or 100,000
Yeah,
people. So there's 10 separate youth hockey organizations, all run outside, because there's only 2 indoor rinks in the whole city at the time. So they all were run on outdoor rinks. And I know that most of them are still there, because when I go back, I still go to Glen Avon, was where I literally, from the time I was 6 years old, I'd get my bag, I'd walk a half a block to the rink. My parents didn't even bring me there. I could just walk with my stuff, get
no
on the
way.
ice, practice every single day. And I think that still happens to a certain extent,
Yeah,
you know. Climate, I don't know if the weather cooperates as much as it did 30, 40 years ago, like, so I don't know if they have maybe some challenges because it's not always cold enough for outdoor rinks to work all the time. But that was what I grew up in there.
yeah. No, my understanding is it hasn't changed a whole bunch. We're gonna actually be down there in a couple weeks here for the Minnesota high school coaches fall clinic. So
Gotcha.
yeah,
That's
we'll
really
get
cool.
we'll get caught up
Yeah.
there. Um, you jump into. I'm assuming coaching was kind of on your radar as a player because it seemed like you couldn't, um, get in the arena fast enough. You did 1 year as a volunteer at RPI where you played. You were the captain there, but then you did 2 years of coaching Peewee hockey. I understand. I'd be curious. Like, was there maybe a benefit to coaching Peewee hockey and just cutting your teeth there before kind of really getting rolling?
I think so. I met some awesome people, like, so I graduated in 2004, And then I ended up coaching a travel Peewee team in Albany, New York, which is, New York's kind of there's a lot of good, great hockey players that come from the state of New York, but a lot of it's like more around New York City, Long Island area, and then you have Buffalo and some of the upstate areas, Rochester, Syracuse. Albany is not a traditional hockey hotbed, in New York. So I was coaching a Peewee travel team there for 2 years while I was working for. I knew I wanted to coach. I graduated. It was a lockout year in the NHL. I was not going to play in the NHL, but it probably would have pushed me down a league or two because all the American League got pushed to the East Coast League.
Yeah.
So it was a really hard time to play. So it was actually kind of nice to have that decision almost made for me. And then I worked full time to kind of to try to find a way to get into the coaching world, which is tough, to make a living doing it. And so that 2 or 3 years before I volunteered, or even when I volunteered, taught me a lot, not just hockey wise, but just how to kind of survive, and, I was working for a bank and, basically, and then I worked for a mortgage bank, you're 100% commission based. So,
Oh, no
you
way.
learn how to value your time and you learn how
Then
to,
you learn how to sell too. That's
you learn how to
interesting.
self,
Yeah,
no question. Yeah. And that's, I think working for the mortgage bank was the most important, especially for recruiting wise.
I
That's
bet.
definitely the most important experience I could ever have. You learn from the failures you had. And you could work with somebody for 3, 4 months, whether it was someone buying a house or, buying a building or whatever it might be. And then and then at the end of the day, they go somewhere else and you've wasted months and months and months of your life and your time for nothing. And so I thought that taught me a lot about, having, being clear and the communication piece of the, hey, this is what we promise to you. And hopefully, there's a verbal contract here. And,
Yeah,
that, and in coaching, there's a lot of that,
100%, man.
so yeah, I learned a lot, coaching Peewees and then, working in the real world. I don't call what we do the real world here. This is we're in the fairy tale world, being able to coach at this level, or I'm sure even the pro coaches feel that way a little bit.
Well, I mean, listen, I mean, you're still a real young guy, but there's a lot of ingredients that go into creating a coaching career. Some are in your control, some aren't. But I mean, you've rattled off a lot of names. So you think of like Greg Carville, Andy Murray, Nate Lehman, Tom Ward. I know you've crossed paths with Jim Montgomery. I mean, I don't know if you could rank a list of better mentors to kind of prepare you for where you are today. Um, any other experiences or people that maybe out of the box that have influenced you and prepared you for this stage?
um that's tough. There's so many that it's hard to kind of, like I again, and it's not just, I'm not just saying this because I'm talking to you, but like, having those type of people at the places where I started volunteering at RPI. um, Seth Appert was the head coach at the time, who's now an assistant in Buffalo
Buffalo,
with the
yeah,
Buffalo Sabres. And Jim Montgomery was an assistant coach, and I shared an office with Monty for a whole year. And
no
this was
way.
that was his first paying coaching job. So,
That's
yeah, and that's how Monty was a big part of me getting the job here. So the hockey world, as you know, is so small.
sure is, yeah.
Um, and being going to Union and coaching with Nate Lehman for 6 years actually, because I went to Providence with him, and he wins a national championship as a world junior coach. He's one of the top coaches in our game all the time. And then Tom Ward coached me, at at Shattuck, and then Carvey was definitely Carvey was really good for me. I think we talked a little bit about this in Toronto there. Like, he's so much different than the previous mentors I'd had, as far as like his personality. And which I think, unless you work with him, some people think he's fiery during the game and practice, and he is, but he is as you know not he wants people just to be themselves, and that's
Yeah.
so that was a really good contrast for me. having going there 7, 8 years ago with him, it was I really love that. But obviously, none of that happens if you don't have a family that allows you
For
kind of to
sure.
be yourself. And whether they knew it or not, they always allowed me to. I'd be lying if my parents didn't think trying to be a coach at this level or whatever was maybe crazy at times, because it's hard. There's only 3 jobs or whatever, now 4 at 60 schools. There's only 150, 200 jobs at this level where you can really make a, obviously at the pro level is even tougher. So it's like, it's hard to do this as a career, and you have to have the support of your family. And I grew up with that, whether they knew it or not, but like just being able to play, and then sending me to Shattuck at a young age as a freshman was, the opportunity of a lifetime. And then, obviously when you get married and you start having kids, if you don't have a supportive family there, you have no chance. And I know, again, that's something everyone's going to say, but we've moved a bunch of times. My wife, Tara, it hasn't been easy on her. We've moved, I think, 5 times since we've been together. Now we have 3 little kids. So it's without that help and without that support, you have no chance, and I've been super lucky to always have that.
Well, listen, man. I mean, I know that you just signed the new ticket and you're extended there in Maine, and so hopefully the moving boxes don't surface
I'm hoping that. Yeah.
anytime soon.
That'd be nice.
One thing I want to ask you about, and I know you gotta rip to the rink here, but Gene Riley's a friend. He was on Sean Walsh's staff in the '90s, and when he talks about Maine, like you can just tell like the emotional connection he still has with that staff, those moments, those memories. Um, Nate Lehman shared when he was on the show that he went to Maine and that he just sort of cold called Sean Walsh, got into his office, and mentioned Jim Montgomery, who was I don't know if people know this, like Jim was a weapon, like he was a offensive dynamo in college and in the pros, and so I can only imagine that there's so many folks that are so excited last year. Like your phone must have been blowing up some games, afterwards. What's that feeling been like? Um, not so much in an ego way, but just to see that something that matters to a lot of people has kind of come back to life, and they get to puff their chest out a little bit and say, "Hey, like I went there."
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I didn't, and that kind of goes back to the question you asked me earlier, like, what were you prepared to be a head coach? I was not prepared for that, for those type of things. There's such um, a strong connection to alums and in the community and really the whole state of Maine, because people will drive hours to come. They have season tickets that might live 3-4 hours away to come watch games at the Alphond every weekend. And I was not ready for that. And sometimes the way you're wired, and I'm sure you're the same a little bit, Aaron, as anytime good things start happening, sometimes as a coach, it's easy to try to push it away, and like, because you never want to get to that point where you feel like your things are good, and I'm really wired to be, all right, what's the next thing? I think most coaches are like, hey, we won a game, awesome. Like, what's the next challenge? Like, where are we
Yeah,
going now? At the end of the year, maybe you take a week or two to reflect and say, okay, that was cool or wasn't. And I've had two. I one as a player at Shattuck when we won the national championship, and then one at UMass where you actually felt like you weren't a failure at the end of the year. So, every other year I've, whether you had, like in the big picture, it's a good year or a bad year, you feel like a failure when you don't win that last game. And so anyway, to answer your question, it's really, it's a super special place to be. I've been here 3 years now, and I have 3 little kids. So I'm in the community with, our kids are in school, and, the people that you see on a daily basis when you're dropping your kid off at school are the same people that are at the Alphon every Friday, Saturday night. So there's something really, really unique about that. I love it. And that, it's not a, hey, it has less, I mean, maybe for lack of a better word, it's not a corporate type of environment here. It's more of the same people for decades and decades. And hopefully we're bringing, the team will continue to do well, and we can, bring a new generation of fans to the Alphon. But, that same token, it's extremely humbling to like, okay, like you realize how how important it is to the community and how how special a place it is. So you also feel that you don't want to ever let anybody down, and so it's sometimes it's you have to realize and you have to be able to internalize that and not let it get you out of your out of your mind a little bit too.
Yeah.
So that's it's awesome. We are so lucky to be here at this time. Now, like, how do we keep pushing forward and keep improving, and that'll be the challenge.
Well, hey, man. I know that you're in the thick of it right now in that challenge. The season's around the corner. I think I speak for a lot of folks. Like a lot of eyeballs on your program right now. Really exciting time, and we're rooting for you, man. Best of luck this year, and thanks for spending time with us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Aaron. Really appreciate it.